The pipe let go at 2:40 in the morning, and the sound it made was not a drip or a trickle, but a deep structural cough inside the wall, the kind of noise a building makes right before it does something expensive. I know that sound now. I've since heard the recording I made of the aftermath more times than I'd like. But in that first moment, I was just a man sitting up in bed in the dark, listening to water find its way into my ceiling, doing the mental arithmetic that would define the next 8 months of my life. The arithmetic came out ugly, and it stayed ugly, right up until the day it didn't. My name is Ethan Ward. I'm 44, a licensed structural engineer, and my particular specialty is forensic engineering, which means that when a building fails, when a roof collapses or a foundation cracks or a pipe bursts and floods somebody's home, I'm the person the insurance lawyers hire to stand up and explain, in patient and unarguable detail, exactly why it happened and exactly who should have seen it coming. I have spent 2 decades reverse engineering other people's disasters. I mention this only because the board of Maple Crest Towers was about to hand me my own disaster to reverse engineer, and then spend 8 months acting astonished that I was good at it. I got out of bed, and I did not panic, because panic is a luxury for people who don't know what they're looking at. I shut off what I could. I threw down every towel I owned, and then I did the thing that would matter more than all of it. I documented. Photographs, wide and close, of the water pouring from the seam where my ceiling met the wall. Video, narrated with the date and time of the stain blooming across the drywall like a bruise. And when the maintenance man finally arrived near dawn and cut open the wall to stop the flow, I asked him, very politely, if I could keep the ruptured section of pipe he'd removed. He shrugged and handed me a 2-foot length of corroded copper riser, dripping and green, like it was garbage. I wrapped it in a contractor bag and set it in my closet. I didn't fully know yet why I wanted it. I just knew, the way I always know, that the thing that broke is the thing that tells the truth, and you never, ever throw it away. That riser was a common element. This is not a matter of opinion or negotiation. In an Illinois condominium, the vertical stacks that run through the walls serving multiple units are the association's responsibility, full stop, spelled out in the Condominium Property Act and in Maple Crest's own declaration. My unit ended at my drywall. Everything behind it belonged to all of us, which is to say, to the board. So when I called the property management company the next morning, I expected an apology and a checkbook. What I got was the first move in a very long game of pretending. The property manager was a man named Gary, and Gary had one signature technique, which I clocked inside the first week. Gary would not put anything in writing. Every question I emailed came back as a phone call. Every phone call was warm, vague, and evaporated the instant I hung up, leaving no record that it had ever happened. "We're looking into it, Ethan. We've got a guy coming out to assess. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." He was, I realized, building a paper trail made entirely of air. And the reason was obvious to anyone who sat where I've sat in a courtroom. You can't be quoted from a conversation nobody wrote down. So I made a small, quiet decision that would end up being decisive. I stopped letting Gary keep things verbal. Every call I followed with an email. Per our conversation just now, you stated that, confirming, memorializing, pinning each slippery thing to a page. Gary hated it. I could feel him hating it through the phone. Good. The second move was the boards, and it was uglier. 2 weeks in, with my unit growing a fine gray beard of mold along the baseboards and the air starting to smell like a basement, the position hardened from "we're looking into it" to a flat denial of responsibility. The board president, Patricia Dunlop, pat to the 11 people who'd voted for her, sent me a letter. An actual signed letter, which was interesting given how allergic her manager was to writing anything down. The letter informed me that preliminary assessment suggests the failure may have originated in unit-side plumbing, and that the association, therefore, cannot accept liability at this time. Unit-side plumbing. My plumbing. They were going to try to pin their rotten common riser on my bathroom sink, and they were going to make me prove otherwise, betting I'd get tired, get scared, and go away. Pat Dunlop had built her entire little political identity on one number, the lowest assessments of any building in the township. She campaigned on it, won on it, and stayed won on it, year after year, by doing the one thing that keeps condo fees artificially low, deferring the expensive capital work nobody sees until the day it fails inside somebody's wall at 2:40 in the morning. Admitting the riser was the association's fault meant admitting the riser should have been replaced years ago, which meant admitting the whole deferred maintenance house of cards existed, which meant her low-fee legend and her personal exposure came down with it. So she wasn't being greedy, exactly. She was protecting a story she'd told about herself. Those are always the most dangerous fights, because the person will burn the building down before they'll let the story die. I went to see my neighbor, an older gentleman named Walt, who'd lived in Maplecrest for 19 years and kept, in a hall closet, a shockingly complete archive of association paperwork. Every newsletter, every budget, every set of meeting minutes going back to before the euro existed. I told him I was trying to understand the building's plumbing history, and he made coffee and let me dig. It took an afternoon, and it was tedious, and I nearly missed it. But there, in the minutes of a board meeting from several years back, buried in the dry language of a line-item vote, was a single sentence that made me set down my coffee. A motion to defer replacement of the domestic water risers in the interest of budget economy, passed 4-1. I photographed it and kept turning pages like it was nothing. Inside, I was very quiet, the way you get when you've found the load-bearing lie. Weeks became a month, then 2. My unit was uninhabitable, the mold advancing behind the walls, and I'd moved to a hotel on my own dime while the board performed the elaborate theater of doing nothing slowly. They finally sent their own assessment, a 2-page memo from a plumber with a business relationship to the management company, gravely concluding the failure was consistent with localized unit-level factors. It was garbage, and I could have written the rebuttal in my sleep, but I didn't rebut it in a letter. I did what I do for a living instead. I documented the failure site properly, photographed the riser's position within the common chase, mapped the water path, established beyond any argument that the rupture was in the vertical stack behind the wall, in the association's exclusive domain, nowhere near my unit's branch lines. I built the kind of exhibit I'd hand a jury, and somewhere in there, Pat's letters took on a new flavor. A little note of concern trolling. Perhaps given the ongoing stress, I might find it easier to simply sell and move on. There it was, finally said out loud. They didn't want to fix it. They wanted me gone, cheap, before I understood what I had. What I had was in my closet. I took the 2-foot section of ruptured copper to a materials lab and paid for a full metallographic analysis. Cross-sectioning, microscopy, the works. The report came back, and it was, professionally speaking, a thing of beauty. The rupture was not sudden. It was the terminal event of long-term progressive corrosion, pitting, and wall thinning that had developed over many years. A slow rot that would have been visibly advanced and eminently predictable to anyone who looked. This pipe hadn't failed. It had been dying in plain sight for a decade, and its death had a timeline written into the metal itself. The riser wasn't evidence of an accident, it was evidence of a countdown, and the board had been holding the clock. Now I had physics. I needed knowledge, proof they'd seen the countdown, and for that I invoked the tool that most condo owners forget they possess. Under the Condominium Property Act, an owner has the right to inspect the association's books and records for a proper purpose, and litigation over a burst common element is about as proper as purposes get. I sent a written demand, minutes, budgets, engineering reports, all correspondence regarding the risers. The board did what boards do, stalled, claimed records were unavailable, produced a partial dump with the interesting parts conspicuously absent. I answered each dodge with the statute and a deadline, the slow, patient pressure of a man who has done this before and is in no hurry. And here, Gary made his one fatal mistake. Rattled by the paper war, forgetting his own golden rule, he fired off an email, an actual email, complaining that I was digging up the whole riser situation the board already dealt with years ago. Dealt with, in writing, from the man who never wrote anything down. I printed it twice. The records, once fully pried loose, completed the picture, and it was worse than I'd guessed. This wasn't a single deferred vote. Years earlier, the association had commissioned its own engineering study, paid for it, received it, filed it. And that report had flatly recommended replacing the aging domestic risers as a matter of some urgency, flagging corrosion as an active and worsening risk. The board had read it, minuted its receipt, and voted to shelve it in the name of Pat's beloved budget economy. They didn't fail to know. They arranged not to act on what they knew. And then, standing on top of that decision, they had looked me in the eye and blamed my bathroom sink. The last piece walked up to me in the parking garage. A woman named Diane, a former board member who'd been the lone no vote in those old minutes, had heard through the building's nervous system that I was asking questions. She'd been flooded too, 2 years prior, by the same riser stack 1 floor down, and she'd been stonewalled into exhaustion and eventually settled for pennies just to make it stop. She'd kept her paperwork. She was, she said, sick of watching them do it to people, and she would testify. My single incident had just become a pattern with a witness, and the word pattern is the word that turns a mistake into a liability with someone's name on it. I didn't file in small claims, and I didn't storm a meeting. I built the case the way the case wanted to be built, and I aimed it at 2 targets at once. The first was a civil action for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty, not just against the association, but against the directors personally, because directors who knowingly ignore a professional warning and let a foreseeable failure happen forfeit the business judgment protection that normally shields them. You don't get to hide behind, "We made a reasonable decision," when the paper proves you decided to gamble with other people's homes. The second target was the Illinois Department of Insurance, to whom I submitted a detailed complaint that the association and its master insurer had handled my claim in bad faith, denying a clearly covered common element loss, manufacturing a bogus unit-side theory, and dragging the process for months in the hope I'd fold. 2 clocks, 2 venues, and in both of them, the same devastating little library of documents. The metallographic report proving the pipe rotted for years, the commission study proving they were warned, the minutes proving they chose economy over safety, Gary's email proving they knew they'd dealt with it, and Diane proving I wasn't the first. It came apart for them the way these things always do once the load-bearing lie is pulled, all at once, and then completely. The master insurer, presented with a bad faith complaint under a state regulator's gaze and a forensic file it could not refute, discovered a sudden enthusiasm for settlement because carriers will absorb a covered loss all day long, but they will not walk into a bad faith finding with an engineer as the plaintiff. My damages were paid in full: remediation, restoration, my months of hotel bills, the ruined contents, the works. The personal liability exposure did to the board what no letter from me ever could. The directors, individually staring down a negligence judgment their insurance might not cover, turned on each other with impressive speed. The association was compelled to commission the very reserve study in riser replacement it had dodged for years, which meant the special assessment Pat had spent her whole tenure avoiding finally landed in every owner's mailbox. Her low-fee legend converting overnight into the largest bill the building had ever seen, with her fingerprints on the cause. The management contract was terminated. Gary took his allergy to written records elsewhere, and Pat Dunlop resigned the presidency before the next meeting, having achieved the rare distinction of being personally sued by a resident for a pipe she'd been formally warned about and chosen to ignore. I moved back into my rebuilt unit in the fall. It's a good unit again: new drywall, clean air, quiet walls. On the bookshelf in the front room, where a guest might assume it's some kind of industrial art piece, sits a 2-foot length of corroded copper, cut and polished at one end so you can see the cross-section. The years of rot laid open like tree rings. It makes an excellent paperweight. It makes an even better reminder that the thing that breaks is the thing that tells the truth. Channel author here stepping out of Ethan's shoes because this one is a masterclass in how saving money becomes the most expensive decision a board can make. Where did Pat go wrong? She built her whole reputation on the lowest fees in town, which meant she couldn't admit the riser was the association's fault without admitting she'd deferred the maintenance that caused it. So she doubled down and blamed the victim's plumbing. Then the details buried her, one by one. The ruptured pipe Ethan saved proved years of corrosion. The old minutes proved they voted to defer it for economy. The engineering study proved they'd been warned. And Gary, the manager who never wrote anything down, finally wrote down that they'd already dealt with it. Every shortcut left a fingerprint. Practical takeaways. Keep the thing that failed. Physical evidence outranks anyone's story. Learn your records inspection rights. That study and those minutes were sitting there the whole time. And confirm every verbal promise in a follow-up email, because the person who refuses to write things down is telling you exactly where to look. Question for you. If your board let a known rotten pipe flood your home and then blamed you for it, would you have run the patient forensic siege Ethan did, or taken the lowball offer just to make the nightmare stop? Tell me below. I want to know how many of you would have had the stomach to keep digging.